Good morning, my creative friends. Dr. Minette Riordan here. This is Painting in Your PJs live with Minette, where we are gathering to connect, to create, to talk about all things life, love, and art. And this week, really to talk about intuitive collage and working with archetypes. And for today, I'm really working with the inner child archetype. I'm working on finishing up the piece that I started yesterday, and I was awake in the wee hours of the morning, which didn't make me super happy. But and finally, I just put in a novel and kind of half slept and listened to a novel. And it happens to me when my head is really full of lots of creative ideas and planning and things going on. And I woke up this morning thinking, oh, I need some black on my design. I need to come in maybe with a mandala stencil. And then I came down to the studio to see all the pieces kind of sitting here and just felt really pulled to do some slow stitching this morning. So I have a couple of different things I want to do to add to this page. And I'm really feeling like archetypally, this is like the adventure seeking, nature loving child. I've got some little nature elements that my friend Leslie had sent me for my birthday that are kind of floating around on my desk here that are pretty. I don't even know if I'm going to use them all, but I also realized that I wanted this background to have a little more drama. Yesterday, I was looking at some of these collage elements with the turquoise and black over the collage. I had this black and white elephant, and I didn't wake up feeling like he was going to be part of this. He may become part of another page, who knows, but that I needed some other things happening to create some of this visual interest and texture on my page. And so I went to our first, I grabbed some found objects around the house to do some mark making with. I have some handmade stencils here made out of foam. I love making my own handmade stencils. I'm thinking this one's busier than I want. I want a more open pattern, but sometimes just the edges can make great lines and marks on these things. And I grabbed the top of a soda bottle, the old top of a used glue stick, as well as a little foamy earplug. I had bought some earplugs and these were too small for my ears, but I don't want to waste them. So I thought, those would make beautiful dots. And in fact, in February, I've decided to teach a fun class called Found Objects, how to use things we find around our house and around our neighborhood for making our own mark in our artwork. I've talked about this before, but I'm a big fan of making our own stamps, stencils, and marks. So the other day I picked up a couple of pine cones as well. And I'm glad I did because we had a bunch of snow overnight and everything's all buried again. But I've got some fun things to play with. I'm not going to use all of these today, but I've started to gather some things for my found object class that's coming in February. Yes, I love making stamps and my own stencils as well. And so my inclination was to add some black on here, some drama. I really want this image to stand out. But even before I do that, I felt this pull this morning to just do some slow stitching. So I found a couple of fabrics that were in a similar color palette. I don't think I'm going to use all of these. I'm probably just going to use this one little piece. I've left this piece of fabric hanging out. I might, add a little slow stitching along the edge here. But I also, so often we can just let designs that are in fabric really inspire some pattern making, and slow stitching. And These are some batik pieces that my daughter and I had bought. I found some scraps left over from a project she was working on. I think this would make a really beautiful patchwork piece, and I love making pockets. So maybe this one is going to become some kind of fun little pocket over here on this page. But that felt like more than I would get accomplished this morning. And so I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to stay focused on this page. I may come back and maybe even do a whole page of fabric collage, but I'm going to stay focused. So this is how my head feels this morning, like so full of so many different creative ideas. So I'm going to start with this little batik flower here that kind of reminded me it's sort of mandala-like and sun-like and floral sunflowers. So there's a lot going on here. So I'm going to come in with this nice contrasting blue and just do a little bit of really simple stitching on here and see what we can create. And of course, the hardest part is always getting that needle threaded. And this is double strands. I'm using just 2 strands from that, typical embroidery floss has 6 strands, but I am going to double that up to make that a little bit thicker. So I have one piece that's 4 strands and one piece that's 2 strands. And I want it to really show up on my design here. It's very curly, curly, curly this morning. So I love making stamps. I love slow stitching. And, it's interesting. I've had people with different, sort of different stories or, comments about this idea of slow stitching. It's basically a resurgence in love of embroidery, but in a much more sort of abstract fashion. And it's very much like coloring and art making, where the intentionality is adding our own mark to something, as well as this idea of mindful stitching. And so it tends to be very abstract. There's some beautiful Japanese work being done around this. And so it's become a trend in the last year or so, this idea of slow stitching. And so I'm literally just going to come in here with a little really simple straight stitch around the edge of this flower and start to just put some color down. I'm not going for perfection. And even as a kid and a young adult, I loved embroidery. I loved needlepoint. I never really loved to sew on a sewing machine, but there's something about this kind of handwork that I find very soothing. I assume, like other people, enjoy knitting and crochet. This has that same kind of feeling and makes me think about, why do we love to make? And why do we love to work with our hands? I think there's, something intrinsically human about our desire to work with our hands. And, it's something that's in a lot of ways is a lost art, although there's been just such a huge resurgence in men and women in crochet, knitting, slow stitching. Moving my mic so I tend to do that, make a nice fresh cup of coffee and then, start talking and forget about it. So already you can see it's just kind of making this little bit of a pattern pop out here in a playful way without too much intention. And I'm just going to continue that same stitch around the edges of these petals here. And I actually got invited to give a talk at the end of this year about, why do we make, right? It's such a great question that this woman asked me to come and speak to think it's the Denver Weavers Guild or Fiber Arts Guild. And if you think back to just across history, there's making that happens out of necessity, but then there's making things beautiful. When you think about some of the Egyptian work, or I particularly love Native American pottery and fiber arts and the beaded work. And so not only were they creating things that were useful and utilitarian, but they were making them beautiful. And I think there is something in humans that just has such an eye and appreciation for beauty, right? Such an eye and appreciation for beauty. And so if you're finding yourself being called to make and you don't know why, I think it's in our DNA. I think we don't know how to not make. It's like, think about modern architecture, right? It's not just utilitarian, but also there's effort made to make things visually interesting and appealing. So I think this idea of making goes so far beyond what we think of as art. And over the last few decades, there's been a lot of maker communities and maker fairs and maker spaces that have created opportunities for people to share what it is that they love to make. People like to make soaps for my mom and sister-in-law and daughter. I made some beautiful essential oil blends, magazines about making. So I think that conversation around making is an important one to happen, that since the dawn of time, we tend to beautify even the most simple things, pots, coats, things to wear. So you can see where I'm going with this. This is going to take me a few minutes to get this piece stitched, but it's going to be really fun and add just that little vibrant pop of color and pattern and my own marks to the page that I am looking for. And now I have all this other stuff over here. I'm going to be excited to sit down in front of the TV this evening and really have some fun with stitching and do some patchwork, maybe even a little bit of applique on there. We'll see what happens. And I'm a messy stitcher, so I'm not super worried about what's happening on the background of this, right? I'm not going to knot that off. I'm just going to pull my thread through over here, because this is just going to get glued onto the page. And I'm going to finish off this piece of thread, and then I am going to move on and just give you that idea of what I'm doing here without you having to sit and watch me stitch. But if you haven't tried your hand at just needle and thread in a long time, it is a very mindful and soothing activity. There's Japanese art of mending. There's some beautiful stitch work called sachiko, where they're creating just gorgeous designs and patterns as part of repairing holes in, for example, a pair of jeans. Some really beautiful work being done there. I think of the classic Japanese art of kintsugi, which is filling holes in a piece of pottery with gold, making them whole and beautiful again, even in their cracked brokenness. This is a great way to, use up and recycle bits of fabric that you might have lying around as well. And I love adding fabric to my journals. I think it gives us a chance to really, these are not very sharp scissors anymore, too much glue on them. But it gives us an opportunity to really use up scrappy bits. I have embroidery thread that I inherited from my stepmom when she passed a number of years ago that's been sitting around in boxes. I have old bits of lace from different grandparents. You know, my stepdad, his grandmother loved to tat, and so I have some beautiful bits of lace, and I used to keep them, and I'm like, why am I keeping all these things? You know, we don't use them. I'm still loving this guy too. So there's another way I could have the fabric in the background and, you know, add the paper on top of it. You can stitch fabric and paper, but you can also stitch on paper. But I love thinking about different ways that I can use up some of this stuff. In fact, I was watching an artist video this morning and they were using some of this bigger, thicker yarn like thread, like for old crewel embroidery. And I have a stash of designs that my stepmom and her mom started and never finished, and I couldn't get rid of them. And I'm thinking, how could I bring bits and pieces of those into some of my own work as well? So this time I'm going to do some stitching right onto this paper design. I really love stitching on paper. I even bought a sewing machine, which Maggie, my daughter, and I have been enjoying for different purposes. But I love stitching together pieces of paper and creating mini collage with stitching, but you can also do hand stitching on paper. You definitely need to just be a little bit mindful. Actually, I'm going to start in the center here. Well, let me start at the edge, and maybe I'm just going to do this star pattern and kind of highlight that star. And this time, I'm going to do a little bit different stitch on here, and I never remember what any of the stitches are called. I need to maybe create myself a little dictionary of stitches, but I want to create a solid line. So I'm coming up and down right at the beginning and end of my stitches to create a solid line of stitching, so you can kind of see a little bit instead of that more open line in the background. I'm getting a nice solid line of stitches. So just coming in, I don't know, they're pretty big, maybe 1/4 of an inch away from that last stitch. Then going right back down at the beginning of that stitch. This may be what's called a running stitch. I can't remember. If anyone knows, you could in the chat and help a girl out. And then I'm coming up again at the end of that one. And again, so much of this for me, there's so many reasons why I make and why I love to make my own mark. I get deep satisfaction and joy and a sense of meaning and purpose out of making art. But I also deeply, deeply appreciate the mindful aspects of art making as well. So drawing, coloring, adding those fine details like this to things really, very much like my Zentangle practice, get me into that state of just sort of Zen flow. I don't have to think about this. I can get out of my head. Because I'm not worried about getting this perfect, this is just for me in my journal. My inner critic voice is pretty quiet this morning as well. So this just allows me again to, I'm not going to get too close to the edge of the page. I don't want that paper to tear. And I think this was from either Breathe or Create magazine, and they have pretty nice paper, so it's not super thick, but it's not super thin magazine paper either, so it's nice to stitch on. So welcome if you're just stopping by to join me this morning. Thank you for being here and popping in. Okay, of course I got knot in my thread there. Come on, sweetie. There we go. I used to do a lot of needlepoint when I was younger. Again, it's that same sort of rhythmic, mindful, peaceful, just following the patterns. I had so much fun this past weekend. I attended an online retreat for certified Zentangle teachers, which I love doing. And I love this, the running stitch. It looks a little messy on the back, but who cares? It looks nice and neat and full on the front. Always reinvigorates and inspires my personal practice and gives me new ideas for teaching or how to incorporate Zentangle into my own work. And I got to do it from home in my PJs. And this week we've been talking about archetypes, and there are so many different types of archetypes. We've looked at symbols, we've looked at animals, but basically archetypes are unconscious patterns. All right, so this is looking pretty fun, that appear across culture, across history, and I'm just going to leave all the way over here. I'm not going to knot it off. Again, no one's going to see the back, so I'm not trying to make this neat and pretty on the back. I'm not a perfectionist. But they're universal patterns that appear in the human consciousness across culture, space, time. And Carl Jung said that there were 12 archetypes that were sort of active in all of us. All right, where's my, trying to find my hole there. Go. And I love working with the energy of archetypes. I often, with my private creativity coaching clients, we do a lot of work with archetypes. I have a assessment that I use by Carol Pearson, who was a Jungian psychologist and has done a lot of work, written many, many books on archetypes. And it's so insightful to look at what's active in our life at the moment. And some of us have archetypes with us that stay with us across our lives, but others tend to show up at different times depending what's going on in our life. And I've been having really interesting conversations around the archetype of the caregiver recently with different clients. And I've had some clients where caregiver is number one on the list, and they're like, man, I thought I was, making peace with that and not doing that, because caregivers, the shadow side of that is we can be overly present to, oops, went the wrong way with that one, overly present to others all the time and being mindful of others without caring for ourselves first. And then I had a few clients recently that caregiver came up absolutely last on their list. And what did they need to learn from that? And I was speaking with one of my clients this last week about, caregiver being last on our list. And this is a older woman who's retired and really looking at cultivating purpose and what's next in her life and figuring out what she wants to do with her art practice. And just the gift of not having to be in a caregiving role. Her parents are gone. I think she might still have one or two siblings remaining on the East Coast. She doesn't have children. It's just she and her hubby. And so she sort of has this freedom in the moment to be really focused on herself. And so I think seeker is one that often comes up for my clients at the top of the list. It's one that's always at the top of my own list. And the seeker is really this idea of being kind of that adventurer, right? Explorer seeking freedom. And the seeker can be seeking both in the outer world and the inner world at the same time. And I think because I've been in that space of seeking over the last few years as well, that I'm very drawn to this particular archetypal image. So not only do we have two children laughing and having a great time, but they're layered in this beautiful piece of art behind a compass, right? And so there's this sense of your whole life's ahead of you. There's so much to explore, so much to do. And I never know when I'm, cutting out these images, where is this going to take me and what's the story this is trying to tell? But this one feels like it's really speaking to the seeker in me. And I love how just adding that little bit of stitching to this design is really making it pop out. I am going to take the next couple of minutes and finish up this design because I'm going to glue this one down. This one I'm going to do some painting, so bear with me while I finish up my stitching, and I may need another piece here too. See how far we get with this one. And in my work as a creative depth coach and all my study with Jungian archetypes, we could talk about the inner child for days. And I think the most important thing to think about when you're working with that inner child archetype is how many different aspects of the inner child they are. A lot of people, when they talk about the inner child, they think about just that, maybe unhappy or sad or happy little 3-year-old, but there are many different aspects of our inner child that are important to explore. There's the spiritual inner child. Remember those moments when you first became conscious that, you weren't alone and you started to ask those bigger questions. Like I remember when my son asked me, he was, little, and we were out for a walk. He said, "Mom, do you believe in angels or fairies or something like that?" I don't remember the specific question, but it's just opened up opportunity for that conversation of, you know, what's true, what's real, and everyone has a different answer according to their own beliefs and faith, right? And so it's normal and natural for kids to have that wondering. And then we grow up and maybe we forget about some of that childlike awe and wonder. There's the nature child, there's the innocent child. There's always, always for sure a wounded child. I don't know anyone that escaped childhood unscathed. Oftentimes, there might be an orphan inner child. Even if you weren't an orphan, you may have feelings of abandonment. And there's always the happy, joyful inner child, the magical inner child. So just thinking about what are those aspects that you feel drawn to, and what aspect of your own inner child maybe needs a little attention aspect of ourself can often try to take control, and we can feel like, what is going on and why am I having these feelings? And sometimes it is because of inner child. All right, just finishing this. And again, just this mindful half hour here of just slow stitching. I can feel my body relaxing. It's not perfect. I didn't try too hard to line all the spokes. I have this just added texture, which just makes me happy. Again, it's, taking someone else's art and making it a little bit more my own, a little bit more, just lightly nodding that off. I'm not too worried about the ends. I'm going to lose that needle. Okay, so I'm going to set these aside. And I want some drama on this page, right? Is what I woke up this morning feeling like it just needed some little bit more drama on here. So I just have some black paint. I love these little tubes of Amsterdam acrylics. They're so easy to work with and travel with. They last forever, much longer than you think. I have a makeup sponge and I have a couple of these found objects. I think I want to start with this big foamy stamp here and get it's and just already it completely changes the page by just adding some of these patterns. And I'm present to, eventually this is going to cover over the top of that someplace on here as well. So maybe I want to add a little bit more of that pattern around the edges. So this is one where I cut the patterns and then I just used a point pen or maybe an awl to really add some additional pattern in there. I really out. I'm going to stick my hand and see if I can get that pattern all the way out. And I don't need to add too much to the bottom down here because this is all going to get covered up. I'm already liking just even this little bit of black really starts to pull the page together. I think maybe this is going to need a little bit of black here to pull it together as well, which just come in with pen. So I just, again, as always, I'm working very intuitively around the page, following those threads, following those morning insights and intuitions. And I can even repeat that same pattern like I did the thread with my pen, kind of give that same feeling of stitching into stitch. It's coming in a few places and darkening that up a bit. Sorry, I was doing that off screen, but now a little bit of black makes it part of the same page. So just starting to trust yourself into figure out fun ways to sort of bring your own mark onto a page. So it's interesting. These are super faint. It doesn't, it's not absorbing very much moisture. Kind of love those polka dots there. Let's see what else we can do. The tops of the soda are fun. They make a nice pattern. It's not a super round pattern. We actually kind of a pretty varied pattern. So again, I'm just looking to make my own mark on things. Letting things sort of bleed over, wanting to bring that pattern all the way out to the edge of my fabric that's hanging over here. And then what if I come in with this a little bit smaller circle? It's inside of there nicely. All of a sudden I have a complete different pattern. Come over these dots. All right, so that makes me super happy to just have added this little bit of black on here. It's going to make my foreground image stand out quite a bit more. And even when I start to bring in some of these other elements that have gotten buried, I realized I really wanted this birdie in here. Again, that sort of nature element. So this is coming together nicely. So, I started this page yesterday. I sat with it for a day. I'm just sort of letting the page guide me. So this one's kind of fun. I'm not sure it's going to go there or where it is that it wants to go. I don't want to get it totally black. So I am going to mute myself here for a second and get this nice and dry. All right, that paper was pretty, or the paint was pretty thick on there, so I think it's mostly dry. That one might not be dry, and you saw me just kind of use a sheet of paper to sort of blot some of that extra off to make it a little bit easier to dry. All right. And I'm thinking maybe I'm going to come in with some white paint over the top of this, or maybe even a pale blue to kind of make this image pop out. I know this butterfly is going to go right here where he's really going to pop out. Again, that butterfly wings have shown up across these collages the last couple of days. So noticing the symbols that are just showing up over and over again. And that butterfly symbolizes metamorphosis, transformation, all the different stages of development that we go through. So I'm happy with the background. I like the black, and it's feeling too busy for my image and for these other pieces that I want to add. So I'm going to come in with my brayer if I can find it. I don't know how things get so lost on my desk. I had two of them sitting here. Okay, so we're going to go with a brush and not spend all day. Ah, there they are. I just didn't quite go far enough on the table. So I'm going to come in here. And I put it thickest on here where my image is going to go. And I'm going to move it around the whole page. And because I'm working on fabric, it absorbs a lot of paint, right? So it's not spreading a ton right here. So if I wanted that to spread just a little bit more, I could just even just put a little water on there and make that paint move around just a little bit more. Again, I wanted the most of that light there where I'm going to be. I don't really want that lighter. And I think maybe it's just, okay. Most of that white is here where my image is going to go. So I'm going to take a peek and see, is that not quite, right? So we're going to just continue to move that paint around a little bit more. And sometimes that baby wipe is a great way to just move paint around on the page. So I'm still sort of creating that transparency, but again, just adding a layer of color, whether it's white or another color, just pushes all those individual bits to the background and brings a cohesiveness to the page that feels better. All right, so that's better because I'm starting to see I still have nice texture and pattern. My image is popping out a little bit more, and I'm thinking that once this is glued down, it's just going to get outlined with black so that we can make it stand out. But now I'm also going to be able to see my birdie not get lost in the busyness, and I'm going to be able to bring that happy sunshine in to the top of the page as well. But now it's feeling like I have a lot of open space on there. And I'm wondering if our elephant is going to come back, or maybe this other butterfly. So I'm kind of digging the simplicity of the butterflies. And there's something about that elephant that just intrigues me. Okay, the elephant is going on the page. I think it's just this, it's very curious and circus-like and architectural, and there's something that just has that element of childlike awe and wonder that just, there's surprise and delight in there. I'm kind of liking that. So what if this ended up coming maybe down here a little bit more, adding some color and pattern, but we've got these other pieces sort of popping out. Okay, no, that butterfly doesn't want to be on there. I also had a few like leafy bits. Nope, too much. So you just have to test and try things when you're working this way with intuitive collage. Again, it's letting the images speak to you, letting that story unfold. And this is such a story of adventure, curiosity, childlike awe and wonder. It's really, really delightful. What if this was sort of blooming out of hanging on to this other page. Oh, there it is. So sometimes you just don't know till you move things around. But in doing adding this element here, I'm introducing this orange. So I've got a touch of that there, but now it's feeling like I need to bring a little bit of orange into other parts of my design so that it feels a little more put together, because remember, we want to have those spots of color in different places around the page because it moves our eye. It helps the viewer to tell the story. So maybe I'm just going to come in and do a little mark making. I'm going to come in with this little robin-like bird and just brighten up its chest so it becomes that same color orange. So just moving the color around the page. Moving the color around the page. And this needs to get finished being stitched before it gets glued down. I may even round off some of those corners a little bit. I might even just bring, and I love painting with my fingers, might even just bring a little bit of that orange over here. So now there's some orange sort of framing the page in a few different places that makes this piece fit. I really want this piece on here, but it wasn't quite fitting in the way that I wanted it to. And I'm almost wondering if I want to paint some blue over, just some transparent blue over the top of my elephant to make him pop as well. So again, this is just, I'm not teaching you how to do this. I'm showing how I work, hoping that you take away some inspiration and ideas for your own personal collage practice. Thinking I'm just going to push those back maybe a little bit more. Blend it in a little bit. Maybe come back to that baby wipe. I want that orange to be subtle. It doesn't need to be quite so dramatic. Once baby wipes has some of that white paint on it, so it's allowing me to, again, just make those colors feel a little bit more integral to the piece. Okay, so this guy is saying that he wants to be blue. So let's go find our happy teal blue. And I'm going to use a tiny, tiny bit of blue to start. And it's brush cleaned off. I don't want that one. Let's see. And I'm going to mix it with quite a bit of water because I want it to be really transparent. I still want to see all that beautiful line drawing underneath. Also really want to see the elephant, and I'm happy with the background. So if I don't want to change the background, then I need to change the foreground. So now we're starting to see the elephant here. Looking better. All right, so our elements are all coming together. We've got our orange moving around the page. I love orange and blue together. They're complementary colors on the color wheel, and they always look magical together. Okay, so this is going to live here. And Mr. Birdie is going to live there. So all of a sudden, I have this central image, and it feels like all the other images are sort of growing out of this image to create this final sense of like, yes, there's a compass, but the whole thing is about exploration, adventure, and joy in stepping out into the world, into the possibility of imagination. So you can really, really see that story unfolding. I'm going to get this all glued down. First, I'm going to finish the stitching on this guy, but I need to get this glued down, and then I'm going to probably come back in and do some outlining around the edges of some of these in order to really make them pop out from the page. And I'm so excited for my mythical makeover experience that's happening this weekend. I think I have 79 people who have said yes. We need to trim that up to coming to play this weekend with the looking at the novel The Garden, looking at lots of inner child archetypes and creative play. We're making a handmade journal actually similar to this one. The link is in the description below. There is time to sign up and come and play with me. Okay, so let's see if we can get a little more of this stitching done pretty quickly here. Again, I love this form of creative play. And it's funny, it's one of those things that I go in and out of phases where all I want to do is stitch. And it's something I will work on sitting in front of the TV. And I love creating little patchwork pieces and get incorporated into my journal at a time. So it's a really mindful activity where I might sit and listen to an audiobook and stitch. And I love this sweet batik pattern. I had some other was the yellow was more of a match. I really loved the design that was on here. I've loved batik. It's one of those, arts that was popular with my aunts when I was a kiddo. I don't think I ever made any toys, just and thrift stores, Goodwill, consignment shops, great places to just find, fabrics, worn out clothing, right? A great way to recycle maybe stuff in the your own closet that you don't want anymore, or me with, old embroidery and lace and old t-shirts, houses that aren't nice enough to give away or pass on. Don't be afraid to just cut them up and use them in your art. I'm a big fan of recycling. I never feel guilty, right? Guilty about buying magazines because I know that I am going to always, okay, where did he go? Recycle them and reuse them in my art. I feel like it just magazines. I love magazines and I do read them. Okay, almost finished with this piece, and then we're gonna put this whole thing together and finish it up and see what we can create this morning. So this is one of those pages, right? I worked on it, for part of the live yesterday to just get that first layer of background down, and then adding, some of these other hand stitched elements and paint to things. It's a little more involved. Some of my it tends to, come together really fast and quick, and then some of these stories, they just need time to evolve. Just need time to evolve. So give yourself permission to take the time, to take the time. And tomorrow I'm being guided to work with a magician. So I think we have some fun with intuitive collage and archetype of the magician. I'll tell you more about the type when we gather last session of the week. This is like Zentangle. I just find myself slowing down, getting quiet, just wanting to kind of sit here with the energy of this. Might even be fun with these polka dots to put a few French knots in here. But I don't think I'm going to do that on this one because this collage already has a lot going on. All right, so I took that same palette. I've been using some nice turquoise blue embroidery floss and just outlined the pattern that was already on the brick. And just again, it's about adding my own mark to things, making them feel more personal. Anytime we can take, we're using something created by someone else and we alter that, it becomes our own. It becomes both an honoring of that original artist as well as a personalizing. And people often worry that what they're doing isn't original. Well, there's really nothing new under the sun in art. Yes, techniques and styles and things evolve, but everything is built on the shoulders of things that came before. So when you get caught up in, I don't have anything new or original to offer, remember that everything that you're learning and doing and imitating, they just become building blocks, really exploring and finding your own creative voice and your own creative style. Okay, that feels a little bit more finished now. I love that. So let me just come back in here. Not that off. And I'm being careful not to, when I'm knotting it off, not to go back through the other side, just so I don't see any of those other stitches, but otherwise I'm not being too fussy about it. This is going to be glued onto the page. Nobody's going to ever see the back side. Okay, Minette, I have lost my scissors. How can I lose my scissors right here in front of me on the table? Okay, I am laughing at myself. There they are, buried under a piece of paper. Oops. Everything is piled up around the edges of the camera and my workspace here, so I feel like I'm working in this tight spot. Hi, Marion. I'm glad you slept in. Good for you. So you must have needed the sleep, my friend. But thank you for popping in to say hello and good morning. So we've done some slow stitching on fabric this morning. I did some stitching here on the keeper as well. And now I'm ready to put this baby all together. So I think maybe the elephant is going to go first. And I want to do this with my matte medium. I want to get everything down on here nice and smooth. Even the fabric, I am going to adhere with that matte medium. And I'm using just a cheap chip brush here because it was what was at hand. It's an inexpensive brush from the hardware store, and I'm not too worried if it gets matte medium in it. You don't want to use matte medium with good brushes because it can ruin your brushes. So it's going to take a little extra effort, I think, to get things stuck down to this fabric. So it might take me a few layers of matte medium to load it on there because that fabric is, even though it's been sealed with paint and matte medium, it's still pretty porous. There we go. Got to get enough matte medium on the surface and onto your collage paper to make sure you really get things down flat. And again, the reason I'm using matte medium here and not just a glue stick like I did yesterday is because it's going to create, just like we did with the white paint, really pull the whole piece together. Let's see, I really want to see the elephant's trunk over there. Okay, so we're going to let that piece hang there a little bit. It's going to create more of a smooth surface all over the top of this. So again, I'm putting medium, matte medium, just going right over the top of those threads on the back. Make sure my elephant trunk there. And then I'm going to come around the edges. I'm not going to worry as much on this one about the center of the image where the threads are, but I do want those edges to tie down nice and flat. And this is, inexpensive, just a piece of magazine paper, so it's going to have some wrinkles and buffs in it. They don't bug me. I like texture. You might find, and I'm going between the pieces of the sun, you might find you want things to be a little more smooth. You just have to work at it a little. Definitely, once this is really dry, gonna come in with probably a big black Posca marker and do some outlining around these images to get them to stand out a little bit more. Just using my fingers to gently, piece of orange paint in there, gently smooth out some of the wrinkles in that magazine image. Because it's got all this stitching in it, it's a little bumpy in the center, but it's okay. I may even come in and add a little more definition to these faces. All right. Let's see where we're going to put this sweet. Okay. I think I'm just going to let all of these hang over the page because yeah, you're welcome. So this was fabric in the background, and then well, you'll see when you watch the replay, but I looked at a variety of different fabrics. You can collage them into a piece with the matte medium, just like you would with paper. Um, and I love slow stitching, so I did a little bit of stitching there on that one, which led me to adding the orange around the edges. And I'm thinking on this page, I'm going to do some kind of fun fabric, do some slow stitching on with this fun fabric and create a pocket over on this page. I love adding pockets in my journal. I might do a combination of taking it to the sewing machine as well as adding it here. But matte medium is the thing that's going to come in and smooth all this out because this one is going to be up towards the surface and it's bright on its own. I don't need to worry about completely adhering that down. So I want to just make sure I maybe make sure it's on there. And because it's porous, that matte medium will just go, right through, but I'm going to let, again, these pieces hang over the edge, and when it's dry, the book will still close, but because I'm going to create this pocket over here, or it could just get incorporated into the other page as well. But yes, I love incorporating fabric. What I've discovered is it does create a lot of texture. You really have to like the texture, and to be just mindful of where you want the texture. Sometimes when I put too much fabric in the early layers, I got it a little more bumpy, so I tend to add the fabric either as a whole piece like this that I'm working on top of, or to wait and add some of those elements a little more into the design. So this is my archetypal inner child aspect of my inner child that loves adventure and travel, that's a seeker, that doesn't want to travel alone, that loves to travel in community as well. You're welcome, Marion. I am definitely in my happy place. So this is the completed, just bringing that a little bit closer, right, to see where I brought in all that texture and those different elements. And it's interesting because we went from the first 2 days, so these very dark, moody, archetypal, sort of warrior imagery here, but still, there's change happening, transformation. There's a theme of transformation. That butterfly moth is appearing across the images. There's sort of going deep, but there's still a theme also of travel and exploration, a lot of fairy tale castles, to suddenly this very bright, happy page. And it's just the way that intuitive collage works. Again, I was really just going from whatever was on my page, right? I was allowing myself to just simply be led by what was showing up, letting myself be woken up at 3 4 a.m. this morning with, okay, the page needs some black, and what does it need? And so my art often wakes me up in the wee hours, and I'm still thinking maybe I'm going to do that same running stitch around the edges, and I won't take time to finish that now, but I just want to put maybe a couple of stitches in here and say, okay, do I like it? So before I commit to doing the whole thing, does it add anything to the piece here? And I think it does. I think it's going to just allow me to sort of create of a frame around the. So I'm pretty happy with how this one turned out. Again, it's not quite finished. I do want to come in and add some black outlines to the elephant and maybe a little black detail here, but this needs to be completely dry, and I think air dry before I bring any of my nice pens, because the fabric is tough on the nibs of the pens. This muslin can be, it's rough, right? Or it's not muslin, it's cheesecloth. So it's very rough, and that combined with any of that wet glue can really destroy the tip of a pen. So I'm going to be very mindful of that. Let this dry for today. Say thank you so much for joining me on my journey into intuitive collage and my inner child who loves adventure and travel and is a definite explorer and seeker. And we'll be back tomorrow, and we're going to work with intentional intuitive collage and the archetype of the magician. So I'm going to start by knowing I'm going to be playing with the energy of the magician, and I'll just see where that leads me. As always, thank you so much for joining me. This is Dr. Minette Riordan, Painting in Your PJs Live. We'll be back one more day this week, 7 a.m. Mountain Time, and have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining me.